All right, so I asked you, instead of 3, just tell me one that reproduces sexually and one asexually. Let's see what you came up with. Bacteria and cows, that works. Well, sloth sexual, bacteria asexual, right? Those are all sexual, humans, dogs, and cats. Jellyfish is sexual, so is a chipmunk. Those are both sexual. Bacteria and people, yep. Germ, I'm assuming bacteria and people. Plants. Plants actually are a very sexual organism. You think about flowers. A flower is the sex organ of a plant, right? Yeah. Birds and the bees, remember? Flowers and the trees. Yeah. We'll talk about that later. It's coming, don't worry. So, starfish, yeah, and wolves, those are good ones. We got fragmentation. We'll talk about that today. Bacteria and octopus, octopi. Nope, plants are sexual. I know it's tricky, right? You think, oh, it's plant. Amoeba, yeah, some, yeah, most actually. Asexual plants. Plants are sexual, though. We've talked about that. See if there's anything new. Ooh, I like the koala. Oh. They're mean, I guess, so I've been told. Chicken is not. Okay. I'm not even. I will never ask who answered that. Right? They have eggs, right? So a chicken is sexual, so is a dolphin. Asexual plant? No, those are sexual. Okay, we'll talk about it. Fern, asexual, yeah. And actually, a fern's a tricky one because they alternate generations. We'll talk about that later. But they are asexual for the most part. So, yeah. So, we're going to look at both sexual and asexual reproduction and how the offspring compare to the parents. Now, we look at you guys, and I look at your mom and dad, and you don't look exactly like them unless they clone themselves, or themselves, sorry. I always say that's on my bucket list. I'm going to have a clone of me. That's my next child. I think after I raise my children, it will be legal by that point to have, like, a clone.
Why would you want one?
I don't, because I always wanted a son, and this will, like, guarantee it, right? What? Well, I could, but I kind of want me running around in the world again. Who is going to carry this legacy on if I don't have a clone? What? How could you? They could come back and teach at John Glenn, and we could do it all over again. And your kids could have like the clone, Mr. Mason. Yeah, that's okay. It's a little weird, but it's still okay. All right. So today we'll also look at chromosomes and the chromosome number, which is a huge part of identifying, you guys, what you are as far as either a sexual or an asexual reproducing organism. So an asexual, if I put an A before something, it means not. A single parent passes a complete copy of its genetic information on to each of its offspring. That means that it'd be like me cloning myself. It'd be exactly me. So it's asexual, meaning it does not involve more than one person or one set of genes. Now an individual, what? Oh, you just called me acool? That's not good. That means that I won't say that. So an individual formed by asexual reproduction is genetically identical to its parents. So it would be a clone. Prokaryotes reproduce asexually by a kind of division called binary fission. Bi means two, fission means to separate, right? So to separate into two, bacteria, they just clone themselves and divide. Now many unicellular eukaryotes are also going to reproduce asexually. A lot of those pond organisms we saw earlier in the year are asexually reproducing single-celled eukaryotic protists. So some multicellular eukaryotes, such as starfish, go through something called fragmentation. Yeah. I might have gave you the wrong ones. I will fix that at the end of the hour, I promise. Okay. So fragmentation is a kind of reproduction in which the body will break down into several pieces. Some or all of those fragments regrow missing parts and develop into complete adults. So you can grab a starfish out of the ocean. This is kind of mean, don't do it, because you break them apart too much and it doesn't work. But you can rip them up and throw them out there without doing it too much, and they'll become more starfish. It's called fragmentation. Planaria do this. Anybody know what a planaria is? It's a little flatworm. They're microscopic. I was hoping to see them in the microscope this year, but we didn't see any. So planaria can do, you can tear them down the middle, and they'll grow two more heads, or not two heads, but another side of their head, cephalopods. What? No, that's like a myth that you can cut a worm and you get more worms. Worms have multiple hearts, but they're all in one spot, and they can bleed to death, and you separate the head from the anus, and nothing's going to work right? So, no, they got in and out. I know, it's like one of those, yeah, they got an in and outy. What? Yeah, if conditions were favorable, yeah. I mean, it can obviously get an infection and die, but yeah. Don't mistake that with pulling off a lizard's tail. That's regeneration. That's different. That's a completely, you don't get another lizard from the tail. You get one lizard regrowing his own tail. You don't get like a whole head and body from the tail. Yeah. So the bird gets to take the tail and gets a little snack, but they don't get the whole lizard. So other animals such as the hydra, yes, there's a hydra. It's microscopic, it's eukaryotic, and it's single-celled, right? So it's not like this huge complex organism. You can only see it with a microscope. There's actually a picture of one in the book. So this goes through something called budding, which is kind of like a conjoined twin. It just kind of grows off the side of them, like a cactus almost with an arm going off. Okay? And the new individual then splits off from the existing one and becomes its own. So it'd be like growing in Mr. Mason and be talking to me, and then you kind of climb out of me eventually and grow another leg, and then we'd both be here. Okay? Wouldn't that be weird if that's how we reproduced? Instead of pregnant women, you just have an extra buddy because he's budding. So some plants like potatoes do this as well. They form those eyes, right? You guys ever see the eyes on the potato? Yeah. You know what I do when I see a potato with eyes? I run because potatoes aren't supposed to look at you. Eyes. So when they have eyes, like eyes, but they call them eyes. They're little buds. Yeah. You guys done the potato lab in the elementary, middle school, where you cut the potato in half, put it in there? No? And it starts to root down? No? A potato is kind of cool. It's called a tuber. It reminds you of a tumor, but it just is a reservoir to hold extra nutrients for the plant above. But it can actually regenerate a whole new plant. And that's why, they are delicious, yes. Carbohydrates, we like them. And as you know, they are the source of all our energy. That's why we like them, right? So some crustaceans, such as water fleas, you guys saw water fleas in your pond water. We call them Daphnia. You guys remember those? Little things that look like little shrimp. You may see those? Yeah. Reproduced by parthenogenesis. This is where they kind of have both going on. Parthenogenesis is a process in which females make a viable egg that grows into an adult without being fertilized by a male. Now, that sounds weird, but if you don't run into a male because you live in this vast ocean like a pond, and that's like an ocean to you, right, because you're so small, you might not necessarily run into another water flea, right, because they're small as fleas, very often. So you got to be able to reproduce on your own if you have to. Worms can do this too, earthworms. They carry around an egg sac, and they also can, they're hermaphroditic. They actually have sperm as well, and they can swap the egg sac in the sperm with another worm, or they can actually do it themselves if they have to. Now, humans, we often think of us as the defining definition of what a sexual organism is, but keep in mind that females would have been here long before males as far as the world goes. And I don't mean humans, I mean organisms in general. Okay? And a male gender is not necessarily needed in many species. Alligators can actually change the sex of their egg based on the temperature. So it doesn't matter if they have X or Y, that doesn't matter. They can actually, if it gets too hot, they all become females. And that's so they can increase production. They can self-fertilize. So just keep in mind that mammals are a little more evolved, so we're a little more complicated. There are simpler organisms that don't even need a male. And I know, guys, that kind of puts us at it like, oh, shoot, we're not that important. But in a way, It makes sense because where do organisms come from? They don't come from me, right? I didn't have my daughters. I participated in the matter, but I didn't have them, right? Okay. Yes. Oh, I can clone a person. You can clone a person right now. It's no problem. It's just illegal. Yeah. Oh yeah. They've been cloning organisms since the 70s. It was only illegal when they started doing it with mammals, and people freaked out because they thought people would have done it with people, right? I know they would have, and they might have already in other countries, although no one has announced it and shown it yet. So it's huge in the news right now because there are people that are about to start doing it, and I'll tell you more about that later. It's called somatic cell nuclear transfer. We'll talk about that later. All right, I got to move on. Parthenogenesis. We could talk all day on this topic, I know. It's reproduction, right? Everybody's curious as to how different organisms do that. So most eukaryotic organisms reproduce sexually. I say most because there are our little pond microscopic friends that do it a little differently. In sexual reproduction, two parents give genetic material to produce offspring that are genetically different from their parents. That's obviously how we do it. You look at me, I'm different than Craig and Deb Mason. They look similar in ways, but not quite the same. You look at my daughters, they kind of look like me, but they're girls, right? They're different. So, plus they have blonde hair a little bit, so I don't know where that came from. They both have blue eyes, and I have brown eyes, right? So something must be different in the exchange of information. We'll talk about that. So each parent produces a reproductive cell called a gamete. Everybody say gamete. So a gamete is a sperm or egg. It's half the equation, right? One sperm is half of a fertilized egg. The egg is the other half. So a gamete from one parent fuses with a gamete from another. What do we call the process of two gametes fusing together? Let's see if you guys know this. What do we call the process of two gametes fusing together? What do we call the process? Just take a guess. What do we call the process of two gametes fusing together? If you don't know, it's okay. Final first gut instinct answer in 5, 4, 3, 2, come on, 1, go. Back out. All right. Oh. I don't know what I did. Oh, dude, what I do? There we go. Click too many buttons. Fertilization. Okay. Yes. Fertilization, and you make a zygote in the process. We'll talk more about that. Not yet. Pregnancy doesn't happen until it's actually a blastocyst embedded in the uterine wall. But yes, fertilization, making a zygote is what we're looking for. Okay. So the resulting cell is what is called a zygote. That looks like something some science fiction writer made up, right? Zygote. What is that? Who came up with that? I know, it's ridiculous, right? This has a combination of, we'll talk more about what it means later. It has a combination of genetic material from both parents, and we call that fertilization, you told me. And because both parents give genetic material, the offspring has traits of both parents, but is not exactly like either parent. Here's the thing. We all know we're half mom, half dad, right? It's kind of not that easy. You're going to find out in Chapter 12 that you're half of parts of your mom and half of parts of your dad, and this whole new combination. It's like taking half of your mom's deck, half of your dad's deck, shuffling them up and only grabbing a certain amount of each one. You know, there's different types of cards out there, right? And you put them together in a new order, and that's you. So you're very different than mom and dad. In fact, after about 4 generations, I can't even tell you're related to your great-great-great-grandparents, genetically speaking. Okay? That's how much we change from one generation to the next. They don't genetically after about 4 generations. It's too hard to tell. Oh, well, they track your ancestors and where they traveled from and things like that. They keep records, public records. And they do a census, that kind of thing. They keep track of who's in what, like a phone book. So let's talk about that in kind of flow mappy terms, we'll say. I didn't mean to do that. I meant to do this. All right, so you guys might want to do this with me. . So we start off with something called a germ cell. Germ cells are 2N. Ovaries are one type of gonad, and testicles are the other. So a germ cell, right here, is where we start. This germ cell will divide into 2 cells. Yep. And we're going to cover this more later. This is not like all today. I'm not answering that right now. I'll answer it later. I better go check it. I got to call back. Yellow. I do. Okay. Yep. Kristen, your mom's here to get you. So, we understand that we make 4 what are called gametes, otherwise known as sperm. And females do a similar thing, except they end up with 1 large egg, and these other 3 things we'll talk about later that actually don't make it, but don't worry about that. And these are a form of gamete, and these are called eggs. And these are, of course, our sperm. So they come together in a fallopian tube of a woman to make a 2N zygote. Now, what I didn't tell you is gametes are 1N each. So each of these is 1N, 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 1N. We'll talk more about this later. These are all 1N here, too. Okay? But together, if I add 1N plus 1N, I get 2N again. Okay? And this is what is called a zygote. So we got dad making sperm from what are called germ cells here at the beginning inside of testicles and ovaries. We start with 2N, and we end up with 1N. Then they come together through a process called fertilization, right? And we get the 2N zygote. This zygote then will divide many times. It will become a blastocyst, and then we'll go to a uterine wall, right? So we'll just say uterus. And then it will go to becoming an embryo. We'll just say a baby, whatever. You get the idea. And then it will obviously either grow testicles or ovaries, depending on if it has an X or a Y, or an X and an X, and it will become an adult and go through this process again. So we actually go from being 2N to 1N to 2N, but only 1N for a brief period of time. It's kind of weird to think we were all a sperm or an egg at one time, right? Kind of freaky. A little bit. Isn't that weird? We were like smaller than a tadpole at one time. Ooh. Don't think about that too long. It'll give you a headache. That wasn't a joke. That's like... Ooh. So the resulting cell we said is a zygote. So there's 2 basic cell types in your body. There are germ cells, and there are somatic cells. Soma means body in Latin. So these are body cells, somatic cells. That means muscle, skin, fat, those types of cells. Germ cells, I think of, sex cells, right? Germs, okay? Comes from the root germination, obviously, but you get the idea. Creating gametes. So the cells of a multicellular organism are often specialized for certain functions, and cells that are specialized for sexual reproduction are called germ cells. You find these in the gonads, testicles and ovaries. And only germ cells can make gametes, sperm and egg. Other body cells are called somatic cells. Soma means body, so somatic cells do not participate in sexual reproduction. There are obviously more somatic cells that make you than there are sex cells. Sex cells are found in one spot. So asexual reproduction is that simplest, most efficient method of reproduction. Sounds good. Reproduce really fast. But asexual reproduction allows organisms to produce many offspring in a very short period of time without using energy to make gametes to find a mate. Now, here's the thing. Think about deer. They spend like the whole summer growing horns, right? Females raising their young, all that business. Then they spend the whole fall fighting over women. The boys do. And then they finally mate, and then they're barely ready to go into winter, and maybe they aren't, and they starve to death or freeze to death. So think about how much energy is wasted in that whole process of reproduction. Now think about a bacteria. 1, 1000, 2, 1003, 1004. You know, they're done. Okay? Well, not that fast, about a minute. So think about the two different cycles. The only benefit, though, to the bacteria doing it that way is they get a lot. What's the disadvantage there, do you think? They're all the same, and if something kills one of them, it's probably going to kill all of them, right? So keep that in mind. So the genetic material of these organisms varies little between individuals, so they may be at a disadvantage in a changing environment. We're not like that as humans. Think about an Inuit, okay? Inuit's like an Eskimo. And you put me up there with an Eskimo, they're going to outlast me in the Arctic, I'm pretty sure. They've been living up there longer for millions of years, right? I'm in trouble. I'm not built for that. So sexual reproduction, in contrast, produces genetically diverse individuals. Even in this room, we have an extreme amount of diversity. Whenever I see the diversity thing on, I think as a biologist. I don't think like the rest of the world does. I go, we're all different, you know what I mean? Like nobody is even close to the person sitting next to them. Well, except you guys, you know. So a population of diverse organisms is more likely to have some individuals that survive a major environmental change. So if we get a drought, I might outlast an Inuit, right? Like if a tiger starts coming, I know I'm going to be able to run faster than a couple people. Not everybody, but a couple. All you got to do is one, right? Unless there's 2 tigers. How's that saying go? You don't got to be fast. You just got to beat one person, right? Yep. So each chromosome has thousands of genes that play an important role in determining how an organism develops and functions. Each species is going to have a characteristic number of chromosomes. We'll talk about ours in a minute. An organism must have exactly the right number of chromosomes, and if an organism has too many or too few, the organism may not develop and function properly. Our chromosome number is 23. We have 23 pairs, 46 total, right? So a cell that has somatic cells that has 2 sets of chromosomes is said to be diploid, also known as 2N. If you're haploid, you're said to be 1N. And gametes are haploid cells. What are gametes? Sperm and egg. So our N number is 23. Our somatic cells are body cells, right? So our body cells have 46 chromosomes. That make sense? 23 pairs. Our sex cells, or gametes, they're going to have 23 chromosomes because they have half the amount, right? And remember, 1N plus 2N, 1N plus 1N equals 2N. And if 1N is 23 and another N is 23, then that's going to give us 2N, which is 46, right? This is like saying, okay, sperm plus egg equals zygote. You guys get that? Okay. I'm giving you that in a few different ways. I'm hoping that you understand what N means compared to 1N and 2N. That's your ploidyism. You can be polyploidy too. You can have 3N. That's if you have an extra set of chromosomes. That's actually good. That's the only genetic disorder that's good as far as that's concerned. Nothing. And actually, you have an extra one in case you have a bad one. It's called polyploidism. So, but if you have just one extra 21st chromosome, you have Down syndrome. So, or one extra X is Klinefelter's, and one extra Y, you could commit very violent crimes. Seriously. So the symbol N is used to represent the number of chromosomes in one set. N will change depending on the species you are. Humans, N number is 23. So N equals 23, and the diploid number in somatic cells is written as 2N. And human somatic cells have 46 chromosomes, 2N equaling 46. I just had you write that out with me. But I think sometimes reading it doesn't quite explain it. So this is 23 pairs of chromosomes. I want to talk to you a little bit about chromosomes. They would all be the same, and I'll talk about why in a minute. But if I take a look at what are called homologous pairs of chromosomes, that's a chromosome, right? 2 chromatids. That's another chromosome. That's a pair of chromosomes, correct? There's another chromosome. There's another chromosome. So this would be what is referred to as a homologous pair. So that means they code for the same types of genes. Did I say the same genes? Same types. Let's explain that together. Let's say on this pair of chromatids, I have a brown eye gene. Because there can be thousands. Like on one of our chromosomes, we could have 10,000 genes. Let's just look at one. Let's say this is brown eye gene. This is me. I'm using me as an example. Right? I have somewhere on me a brown eye gene. Look at my eyes. Brown, right? I got 2 blue-eyed daughters, and they're not adopted. My wife has blue eyes, yeah. And my mom has blue eyes too. So, nothing to worry about. Right? Okay. So I have a brown and I have a blue eye gene on homologous chromosomes. Homologous because they code for the same genes, not the exact same gene, right? Why are these two the same? And you guys go, well, Mr. Mason, because back in what? Do you have an answer? No? Back in S phase, what did we do to our DNA? We copied it, right? So that's why these two are the same, because they're going to be separated later, correct? Okay. So I don't get to give both of them to my daughter. I have to choose. So I know my wife gave a blue one. It was 50-50 each time I had a daughter, whether or not they were going to have blue or brown eyes. Yes. Yeah, dichromatic. We'll get into that in Chapter 12, I promise. Okay? So if you take a look here, these, when I say homologous, it means they both are coding for eye color, right? Not that they're coding for the same eye color. Yes. So each diploid cell has pairs of chromosomes made up of 2 homologous chromosomes, and homologous chromosomes are those that are similar in size and shape, and I really want you to focus on remembering that it is the kinds of genes, not exactly the same, right? Meaning they code for the eye color, attached or detached earlobes, that kind of thing. And each chromosome in a homologous pair comes from one of the 2 parents. So I know both my daughters have 2 blue-eyed genes now, so that would be the same in theirs. And we'll talk more about how we figure that out in Chapter 12. That's Mendelian genetics. So homologous chromosomes can carry different forms of genes, like I just showed you for eye color, but still coding for eye color. Yeah. Let me ask you this question because I know where you're going. If I flip a coin 3 times, do my odds start over each time? Yeah. So looking at this, if I were to ask you this question, does chromosome number, by the way, adder's tongue is a fern. We do have one in Michigan. It's a Michigan wildflower. It looks like one leaf with a little small yellow flower coming off of it. Okay? Very tiny. You find them in the woods where trillium grows, stuff like that, by ashes and beech. So knowing that, what I just told you about that thing that has 1,000 chromosomes, Does chromosome number have anything to do with the complexity of an organism? Does chromosome number have anything to do with the complexity of an organism? Final guess, answer, whatever, in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Lock you out and take a look. So a lot of you say no, about 50-50, but, well, 60-40. No, it doesn't. What does is the number of different genes that you have. We have over 30,000 genes on 46 chromosomes. That adder's tongue has like 1,200 on 1,000. You get it? So we have a lot on a few chromosomes. We're just organized better. They have many through all these different chromosomes. So we are more complex because we have more different types of proteins that we can make. Which leads into our different types of chromosomes. We have what are called autosomes. And these are chromosomes with genes that do not determine the sex of an individual. I will tell you, we have 22 pairs or 44 chromosomes that are autosomes. We have one pair or 2 chromosomes that are sex chromosomes. And you probably remember what they are, X and Y. Okay? So in humans and many other organisms, the 2 sex chromosomes are referred to as X and Y, and the genes that cause the zygote to develop into a male are located on the Y chromosome. And human males have one X chromosome and one Y chromosome, so we are XY if you're a boy. And the females have 2 X chromosomes, XX. So knowing that, yes, you can. So, if you get an extra Y, the chromosome that makes testosterone, I said you can be a very violent criminal. That is true. You get an extra X, it can just be, it's called Klinefelter syndrome, so it does cause disorders. Okay? It's bad. It's not good. Yeah. So I had the option. My wife, actually, if I look at this, this is me. There's Mr. We'll just say Mr. And there's Mrs. because they're married before this happens. Right? Okay. So Mrs. can only give what? An X to the egg, right? Okay, so there's the X, always waiting there, never going to be different. Okay, the male can give what? An X or a Y. Mr. Mason has 2 daughters. There we go. Okay, so each time it was a 50-50 chance that I would have a girl or a boy. Okay, so it's the Mr., not the Mrs., that controls the sex determination in humans. If you're an alligator, the temperature can control that. So we are very egocentric when it comes to us as defining what animals do. Just keep in mind there's a whole other animal kingdom out there that does things by their own rules, which aren't rules at all. They do what survives. Yes? Well, you can choose. Yeah. Yeah. They can do that right now. Oh, yeah. You got to pay. You got to pay a fair amount of money to do it, but you know, for under $5,000, you can choose your sex. Yeah. That's legal. You just can't clone. I'm waiting, right? It's on my bucket list. I am. I tell my biotech class, because we talk about cloning. When I'm like 50, kids are off to college, they're off doing their career, I'm going to have a mini-me. Be a little weird, wouldn't it? Exactly. It'd be me. It'd be like my identical twin. But it probably would have different experiences. It wouldn't have my crazy military father, so it probably wouldn't be quite so, I don't know, whatever I am. Yeah, they would look like me. Yeah, you know. See, wouldn't that be fun? I think it'd be fun until, like, you know, that'd be a little weird for my wife, though, wouldn't it? Like, because, yeah, I don't want to get into that. Anyway, maybe I ought to just retract that whole statement. Maybe that's why it's controversial, right? Yeah, that'd be weird, right? And then it'd be her kid, but it'd be me, and then yeah, right? So I get now we understand why cloning is controversial, right? So yeah, like yeah, yeah. Anyway, yeah, it went in a weird way, didn't it? All right, so King Henry, let's get to this guy. He was crazy, right? He used to throw his wife off towers when they didn't give him a boy, right? Whose fault was it? Yeah, the king. So he didn't know about genetics, but that's not an excuse for what he did. It didn't make it okay. It's still crazy. Who throws their wife off the balcony? Yeah. All right, a quick summary before we have any more crazy discussions. An individual formed by asexual reproduction is genetically identical to its parents. And in sexual reproduction, two parents give genetic material to produce offspring that are genetically different from their parents. Just remember, one is the same genetic material, one is different. If it's different, it's sexual. Each chromosome has thousands of genes that play an important role in determining how an organism develops and how it functions. All right. I always say that's the intelligent version of health class and reproduction.